All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about why we're changing what we're changing, and I'm sure a lot of you guys will be able to chime in and say, yeah, I've heard some of that, no I haven't, or what's going on. So please feel free to raise your hands as we go through and add your feedback. So what are we changing and why? We're ensuring that peer specialists are better equipped for the job. Okay, so it's not about, you know, the simple fact that you went through a training or that you have lived experience, but are you learning what you need to know when you get that job? Okay, a lot of times what we're hearing is that the peers are having to teach the supervisors what they do, right? I see a lot of heads, all right? So it's, and all the other thing is really about quality and not quantity. So in our state we have the latest figures are 1,071 peers in the state that are certified. That's a lot. But do we know how many of those are actually employed? Right? So we have a lot of certified peer specialists. How many are employed and how many feel they have the skills once they get the job to really do and get down in the weeds and do the documentation and the paperwork and deal with HR office and all of these types of things that come up. Right? So some of the ways we can do this is through standardization. We have to also look at what does the research tell us that knowledge and skills the peers should have on the job, right? You guys heard Paulo yesterday talking about now SAMHSA is developing core competencies for peer specialists. So we're going to have to take a look at that and make sure that our curriculums align with that as well. We also need a very careful selection of trainers, what you were talking about. So the folks training the curriculum, do they have the competencies and skills that they need? And are they able to train the individuals that they leave and walk away with those competencies and skills?
In Georgia, the consumer organization has an institute.
So we also need a quality oversight of that process as a whole. So does lived experience qualify you to be a good peer specialist? No. Why? Does just lived experience alone qualify you to be a good peer?
No.
What do you need to have?
Skills. Education.
Education.
Boundaries.
Boundaries, motivation.
Empathy.
Empathy. So how many of you guys have heard this? And these are quotes, I'm paraphrasing people that have talked to me. I realized later that this was not for me. I went through the training, I have lived experience, I realized later, I don't know that I want to be a peer specialist anymore. You've heard that, right? I had no idea what I was getting into. It was too stressful, fearful, boring. You know, some people find they really want to be challenged, and maybe where they were working, they weren't challenging enough, and they ended up moving towards something else, right? I didn't know how to explain to my boss what I was supposed to do, and they had no idea, right? You heard that? I had to quit my job because my workplace did not understand or accept my role. So the fact that we have 1,071 peer specialists in our state does not mean that every service provider or every organization necessarily knows what the role of a peer is and what the role of recovery is within that organization, right? So this is an ongoing learning process that the peers are also educating the providers, the MCOs, the state, everybody about what this really means, okay? It's not token positions in a provider agency. Oh, let's hire a peer because it sounds great. It's a nice thing to do. That's not what we're talking about. I also didn't learn about all this paperwork when I went to my training. How many of you guys have heard that? I didn't know I was going to have to write notes. I didn't know about a CCA or a PCP or a QPR or what, you know, all these things. You know, documentation. You know, we talked about boundaries. You know, who do you talk to when you're working about maybe ethical issues you're seeing, or maybe you feel yourself that some of the other staff are saying or doing things that aren't person-centered, aren't recovery-focused. Who do you talk to? So those issues have come up. My little comic that you can see up there. What if you're a person in recovery and all your coworkers want to go out for happy hour? How do you feel? You know, and you say, no, I can't do that. Why? Come along, let's go. No, I don't want to be in that environment. That's awkward, right? You know? So these are things that peers go through on a job that sometimes they might not be prepared to deal with, or they might not see is coming, and they're employed, they don't want to lose the income, you're kind of in that bind of what I do in that time. So standardization is important. When you have standardization, the training that you get in Nashville is the same training you're going to get in Greenville. Okay? It's the same content. The way it's taught is differently. There may be some areas to specialize and really focus on some things around veterans issues and substance abuse issues, but the core competencies are the same. So that way folks feel like they're all taking away the same education level around boundaries and paperwork and all that kind of stuff. The takeaway is similar across the state. It creates unity among peers with the same learning experience. It allows for some innovation and creativity on top of that. So how many of you guys have been through a RAP certification training? All right, you guys know what I'm talking about, right? You have a book that I went through the 3-day intro, I went through the 5-day certification course. It was the same training I went through that somebody else went through in Chicago, right? No different. The way that we taught it was a little bit differently. Maybe some of the things we talked about in your area were a little differently, but it's the same thing, right? So that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to make sure that there's some standardization among training in North Carolina. So the research base will be included in our curriculum. So how many of you guys have heard just in the last 2 days how much research and evidence base there is around peer support, right? Did many of you learn that in your training when you did peer support training? Maybe, maybe not. So you want to leave the training knowing what I'm doing is research-based, what I'm doing is evidence-based, what I'm doing works, so that you can have that meat when you go to work and talk to your employers and say, yeah, this is validated in research, right? So what we know, based on a SAMHSA Consumer Operated Services toolkit that was talked about yesterday, we know that peer support yields improvement in psychiatric symptoms and decreased hospitalizations, larger social support networks, enhanced self-esteem and social functioning, decreased lengths of hospital stays, and lower costs overall. Okay? So peers need to know that. They need to have that in their toolkit to speak to it with confidence. So we want to make sure that the curriculum also adheres to best practices and fidelity among the professionalization. Also, trainers. So these are the folks delivering the training. The training may be great, but if the trainers don't know how to do it, or if the trainers aren't equipped with the tools they need, the delivery is not going to be great, right? So we need to be careful of who is training in our state. In our peer support website, you'll see a long list of trainers. The way that we set it up in North Carolina before I got here, but the folks here had a lot to do with making sure we had a lot of folks that were willing and able to do this. And we have a lot of great trainers at the moment. But we also have people that have fallen off the map, so we don't really know who's still doing it or not. So we want to get to a point that folks will come through a process, that everybody gets the main train-the-trainer, so that we could relearn the new curriculum, and then folks will be able to train on that, so that we can have a better idea of who's training, when, and where, and why. And we haven't figured out all the kinks, and all this stuff is still in discussion, but that's really the idea of what we want to do. So the idea would be to develop a train-the-trainer course. So everybody that's currently training would come to that course and learn the new material and become versed in how to deliver it. Yes?
Does your trainers have to have lived experience as well as other qualifying?
Yes. Yes, that's a good question. So that's something that we have a planning committee that Ron's going to talk about in a few minutes. We want the trainers to have lived experience, because that's it makes sense, right?
Are they paid? The trainers paid?
Well, we don't have all that figured out yet.
Okay.
Yeah. Question?
And peer support certification?
Yes, ideally. Don't quote me on it, we're still working on stuff.
Well, as I understand, peer lived experience is a job requirement.
Exactly. Yeah. Lorna.
I don't know if you'll speak to this, but it's something that we observe in acting.
Substance abuse, then you're not going to hire somebody that has only experience with schizophrenia. You know, that wouldn't make sense for a lot of places. Some people would argue against that, but I think that we need to provide education around, if you're, you know, the similarity around that. So I think there's several places that we could help people in the hiring process. You know, and the catch is that when you're hiring, you can't ask some of those questions. So how do you ask, what is your lived experience? So that's a whole different conversation that we could get into. But
It's analogous
I'm
to,
sorry.
analogous to schools of education debate, where schools will criticize for teaching people how to teach, but not what to teach. And the what is a lived experience.
right,
Now, the peer certification may be for how.
Lorna?
It would be cool if in the certification process we had tracks. And that track helps kind of.
We talked about that, didn't we?
Yes. Best conversations happen over coffee or.
Yes.
Like that, so.
We've talked about tracks.
Yeah.
So yeah, the other important piece is around shadowing. So a lot of times you might get that training, you'll sit through the 3-day, 5-day, whatever training, and then you're on your own and you don't have anyone to talk to after that. So the idea would be that we would link and make sure that the trainer is also shadowing that person at some level through the process of them getting hired and working, and they can always have a mentor to come back and ask questions, say, hey, I didn't really know this is going to happen, how do I deal with this, you know? So peer support among the peer supporters getting the training.
Excuse me, I just
yeah.
had this idea.
Yeah.
Is there any plans down the road of trainings that peer support specialists would attend to help educate them about how to educate their employers and teammates? And,
Yeah. That could be on our list.
the wish list.
The wish list.
Yeah.
So the other process would be that between the state and our UNC center, we would also keep an oversight of the trainers. So every maybe 2 years or 3 years or something, trainers would have to recertify to continue training so that we can have them get continuing education credits, and you know, the same process we do for a lot of the certifications and licensures that we have. So a process of quality improvement for the trainer also, which is very important. So the quality oversight of training delivery. Master trainers, whatever we want to call them, I just made that name up, shadowing new trainers to ensure fidelity. Okay, what do you guys, is everybody familiar with the term fidelity? More or less? So how much of that process is faithful to the model that was developed? So are the trainers really training on the right stuff? Are they hitting all the right points? Are they keeping to the 5 days versus, you know, having it stretched out to 20 days? Are they making trainings in rooms that are all messy like that? You know, are the trainings actually organized well? So everything has to do with whatever is developed into this train the trainer manual. So we would develop a manual that the trainer would have that would say, this is how you kind of set up the room, this is the sample of an agenda, this is a sample of your pre and post test, sample, whatever. And this is how you train this module. This is how you train that module. This is what you talk about during this module. And then folks that we'll talk about our planning committee will go out and review how that training is being implemented. So we'll sit there in the back and check off. We'll use a tool and check off, are they hitting those points? Are the folks engaged? Are they really doing a good training? And we'll offer some quality improvement feedback for the folks. So this is really a way to help the trainers know that they're doing a good job and what things they have to work on. This is something that I experienced also with the Copeland Center when they were looking at me and how I was doing my RAP training. And it was very intimidating having BJ North sitting over there, who's one of the developers, and she's looking at me like this. I'm like, oh my gosh, I better say this right. But you know what? The feedback that you get afterwards, you know, Emery, you did this really, really well, this not so well, and work on that. And that's how I learned, right? And so we need to expect the same thing out of our peer support system in North Carolina. So Ron's going to now guide us through who and what, and, you know, who's developing and working on this stuff.
And if I could go back just a second to a question that was asked just a moment ago from my left here, and it's around helping people in the organizations understand the role of peer support specialists. One of the things that the team has spoken about is establishing an organizational readiness module that'll be about an hour to go in and train leadership and anyone that's interested in organizations. It'll be about a 45-minute training. At least this is what we're thinking about at this point in time, with about 15 minutes of discussion at the wrap-up. And part of that comes from my old EAP background. We know when we train managers in leadership, you got about 45 minutes, and that's about it. But we do want to get in there and begin to prepare people who will be working with peer support specialists appropriately so that they'll understand your role and what to expect. So thank you for that question. So what I want to talk a little bit about is the who. And one of the interesting things about the who is, who are the change agents? Who are the people that are involved in this process that Emery was just discussing? What we want to do is to be able to have transparency, and that transparency is for both the participants going into the training process as well as the person training. When we establish this TTT, the training for the trainers, they will know everything. The form that Emery just spoke about, they'll have. So they'll know what we'll be looking for when we come in. They just may not know when we'll be arriving and things of that nature. But again, we're going to be working on that. So who is this team that's pulling all this together? We had a couple of criteria that we wanted to think about. And the first one is people who are experienced trainers. Who better to develop this process than folk who've already done it? It helps tremendously to cut down on that learning curve, to be efficient, and to make sure that we're hitting all the marks. We have people who have been through a minimum of one train the trainer in the past, and that could be REP or one of the peer training programs. So someone who's gone through the process and understands that when you develop a train the trainer, that means that that person will sit through the course, be instructed on it, then have someone he or she will shadow with. Then they will train a part of that course, receive feedback, and eventually train the entire course and be evaluated in it. So it's not a short-term process. It is a commitment to that fidelity that we're interested in and making sure that the trainers are going to be able to deliver this information so that the recipients of the training will be able to understand it no matter where they are, and it will be consistent. That fidelity is totally important. That is a very crucial word. So having someone who's gone through that process, as Emery was sharing previously, makes it easier to understand that. Someone who can cover the state geographically. And I'll talk a little more about that in a second. And it's important to know that at least 50% of this team are certified peer support specialists. So it's just not a bunch of academics or, as my friend Kent called me, a cone head, getting together. Of course I did, and that's why I gave it. But I love, Ken and I have a wonderful relationship, and I won't go into that story, but I met Ken at my very first training. And he welcomed me very well to this process.
Before you actually started work.
Okay, yeah. So what we do, we have a nice blend of people from all the areas that can make sure that we hit the important parts of this process, because it is really important as we begin to take it out of the door, if you will, from the starting blocks and have it as accurate as possible. Yes, sir.
Very quickly, Ron, with a certified peer specialist, is there an assumption that they would be experienced peer specialists?
Experienced in...
Not only certified, but actually...
Yes.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. And if you take a look, here's our list. And I won't go through this list, but I think this list speaks for itself. And I think some of the names on this list are in the room right here, right now.
Ron,
Yes, sir.
at some point at that time, did you comment on any advancement toward national peer support standards?
Well, I think Emery spoke about that. And that was one of the things I was excited to hear about yesterday, because one of the things that we get asked a lot about is reciprocity. And in my idea, just from listening to yesterday, once we begin to get those standards and we can incorporate that into our training. Now, I'm speaking way out of the box because we haven't talked about that.
More than reciprocity, the VA hired the President by Sport Alliance to train on this. And then once you're inside the federal government and certified, you can work in any state.
Yes.
So,
Yeah. But one of the most important things is making sure that there are 37 states, I think, that have peer support, that there is consistency in the training and the standards. And one of the things that struck my attention yesterday, listening to the first opening speaker, is if they have those standards on a national level and the states begin to implement those standards, then it's easier to have reciprocity.
And I mean, any state within the federal government, same for doctors and lawyers.
Yeah, okay. So here's our training.
Federal agency.
Okay, here's our training council. So as I mentioned, you probably know most of the names, if not all of the names. And we do have, for the sake of this, in the event that someone might not know, if there are any members in the room whose names appear here, would you please stand so that others might be able to seek you out if they don't know who you are?
Stand up,
So,
He's surfing.
yeah, at least 5 folk in here that you can seek out if you have other questions. So, what is the task of this group of men and women meeting? One of the first is standardization, what I was just speaking about. Making sure that the same thing is being taught no matter where you are within the state of North Carolina. Updating the PSS application process, beginning to make sure that that's running smoothly and we're covering all the areas. Establishing the train-the-trainer protocol. This is really important, and this is, we're going to be putting a lot of emphasis on this part of the process. First, we'll have to develop the facilitator's training manual. And from the facilitator's training manual, we will develop the train-the-trainer training. Developing a train-the-trainer application and approval process. So people will be submitting applications if you're interested in becoming a trainer to come to the training process. And that will have to be approved prior to that process. Then we'll have to conduct the first train-the-trainer. Remember I said if you're going to be on this committee, you have to be prepared to travel around the state. Because these committee members will be taking this training around the state. So they have to be prepared to do that, to conduct those. Establishing policies and procedures. As I listen throughout the years, there are questions that come consistently to us at the office. And what we understand is we do need to tighten up our policies and procedures so that not only will people understand what the policies and procedures are, but they'll be able to go to the website and or other places and be able to see them and know what they are without calling us. And if they need further clarification, then they can call us to assist them in understanding what's going on. Web page for trainers, that's just a resource tool to help trainers understand and communicate with each other if they're having difficulties with certain areas to get training tips, things of that nature. Decisions on additional 20 hours of required training. One of the other areas that we've talked about is having areas of specialty. So we want to begin to establish what areas of specialty will be utilized and what types of training will be needed for those areas of specialty, as well as anyone that may have the standard training, what consists of approved 20 hours, so you'll be sure that you get them. And we do get quite a few calls around that area right now. We have the frequently asked questions on the website, but we don't mind the calls, and it does speak to that. When the federal government, the VA, started their process, and it was good to hear yesterday that they want to have 800 by the end of December, and they've already met that. It was great to hear. But one of the concerns that they had was making sure they had the capacity to meet that goal, and it's pretty apparent that they have. We also want to make sure that we have the capacity for the specialty roles that might be established also as we move into the development of that. And Emery has already mentioned that development of a toolkit to help providers on hiring peers. So what does that mean? Does that mean, as Emery said, I should take someone that has an area of specialty that won't work in our organization and hire them for the sake of having a peer support specialist? What does that do? That sets up at least 3 entities for probable failure. That peer support specialist that's being hired, that organization that's doing the hiring, as well as the person receiving services. So what we want to do is make sure we're able to help providers understand the importance of screening peer support specialists, making sure that they match them for their organization as well as the job functions that they'll be delivering. And what I always have to say here is, and if that happens and it doesn't work, it doesn't mean that peer support will not work. It means we need to hone our skills for hiring people and make sure we get the right person in the right position. And so there are times when I'm talking with managers and supervisors, and I was at a conference a couple of years ago, and I was not feeling well. my allergies were flaring. I was sitting in the back of the room, and there were some managers, where there was a large room, more folk than this, speaking about how it had not worked. And I had to address that by saying, how many times, if you will allow me to use this, have we hired people who don't have lived experience and it hadn't worked? Did you give up? The answer is no. So think about it before you make those statements. Sometimes you may not get the right person out of the box. If you've ever bought a car, you probably bought a car the first time, and then you realize, well, now I know what kind of car I want. You know, you kind of get an idea about it after you purchase something. So when people come into the organization, don't give up because the first time it may not meet all of your needs. The other thing that's really important about this is it might be the supervision style or the lack of supervision style, the lack of clarity. So what we want to do is make sure that we have all the tools that a person might need to make that employment successful. And that's what this toolkit is really going to be looking at. So all of this when? We started 9/11/13 through 10/21, and 10/21/13 we had a couple of face-to-faces, 2 face-to-faces, and 2 webinars. And out of that, we've also had additional meetings. I won't go through this, all of what's been going on. I know there are several committees that have been working on additional parts of this process. Emery probably got the same email I got this morning, where we're going to be scheduling a meeting as soon as we can to begin to pull all these pieces together where people have been working independently. We had folk come to Chapel Hill, let me say that, and spend quite a bit of time there. And I have to tell the Curriculum Development Committee that I was at a conference last week, and there was a person that said, you know, I really would like to be on that committee. And I said, well, I'm really sorry, but we've already had 4 meetings. A lot of that work has been done. And as I said, as a matter of fact, they met last week in Chapel Hill. And do you know that they started at 3:30 that afternoon and they didn't finish at 11:30 that night? And that person said, I don't want to be on that committee. So it was pretty funny to see how they selected out. But this committee has really worked hard. Yeah, they worked hard. And that was 2.5 days that they were together.
After an initial 8 hours on a Sunday night.
Yeah.
I'm just saying. I'm not keeping track. But.
Uphill snowing with no shoes.
Yeah.
That's nice.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, so it's really important to know there is a lot of effort going into this process to make sure that we're able to offer something that will be appropriate for everyone. So you can see what our timeline looks like. 11:15, we want to have the skills list for each task and development. And that was something that Emery spoke to earlier.
Is that today? Is that through today?
Yeah.
It was. Emery and I out of pocket, so remember I said we got that email this morning that I saw.
We got 5 minutes.
Yeah.
All right, skip that slide.
Yeah. There is a template in place. We just haven't had time to review it. We will have knowledge lists for each task developed by today. We will have a review and approval prior to moving forward. So, of course, some of this timeline is off. But once we get together next week, we will, I'm sure, be able to move through this process and get it ready to go. Then you can see one of the things we had to take in consideration is, if you think about when we started, there are probably 3 to 4 work weeks left in the year. Holidays, things of that nature. So it's a rough time, but we wanted to give ourselves enough time to pull all this together and roll it out. Of course, we are hoping to have everything pretty much in place for review and approval by March 2014. Approval by the DMH and DDS and SAS. Then we have to go out and field test it. That's going to be in April. So once we field tested it and work out the kinks of all the training materials, we have to revise it, finalize it, and finally implement it. So for folks who've been asking when, you can look towards us implementing this process July 1, 2014. Okay? All right. So, current trainers will need to apply. Once we've completed this the process, we will be developing the actual application process and getting that out. I know that a committee has been working on the PSS application. and that this application will have clear questions about lived experiences and personal recovery. Now, the application does ask that, but sometimes when people respond to that application because we don't qualify, I've had applications come back with 3 to 4 lines explaining their lived experiences, and at least one person have 25 pages typed front and back. And that's sort of the range. So what we're going to do is qualify this process. And then there are some folk who will honestly try to fool the system, if you understand what I'm saying. But if you've ever worked in recovery, it's pretty easy to see through people who are looking for a job and people who have lived experience and are working a good recovery program. But that application process, I'm sure, is going to begin to improve that evaluation process. Trainers will have clearly defined course delivery guidelines. So when a trainer is training a specific module, he or she will know exactly what they're going to be hitting. They'll know their timelines, etc., what is to be included in that course, and how it is to be delivered, what tools will be used. We will have fidelity, and we will have accountability. Trainers will have policies, protocol, and procedures for course process, course delivery. They're going to know what we expect from them when we're sitting there. I'm sorry, yes, sir.
Now, when you say current trainers will need to apply,
Yes, sir.
what about people that aren't trainers yet?
You will be able to apply also, but we want to make sure that it'll be an open application process, but we want to make sure that anybody that's already on the training list understands they'll have to reapply. Okay? Am I representing correctly, Tim?
You're going to have a pass-fail in standards, right? Unfortunately. I mean, some people won't make it.
Right.
Yes. Yes, because there will be a seeding process where, based on their responses in this process, they may or may not make it. And the other places some folks don't make it is doing the TOT. The training the trainers, I was always called training of, but it's training the trainer process. Some folk will not get through that process.
And that's the other reason why having a council is important, because you want a group of people to make that decision like that, because you don't want somebody to come back and say, you know, Ron just didn't let me pass because he didn't like me, you know? And it's really a consensus way to do that, so that we don't blame it on Ron, but that, you know, it's as much as I want to, I'm kidding. So, you know, you understand the reason behind that, because some people might not pass, and that might be a difficult thing for people, so.
And you know, we want them to function very well with employers, because if
Right.
they get fired, they might rightly or wrongly blame it on the disability, so we want them to follow that.
All sorts of issues.
The other part that's really important is participants, upon entry of this process, will have clear expectations of what this process should entail. So we're developing all of this right now. The course will have a built-in trainer evaluation, and what we're discussing is this. As opposed to participants receiving their certificates at the end of the training, they will have to go online to a designated website, complete an evaluation of the training, then they will be able to print out their certificates. What this will allow us to do is to know immediately the quality of the training, and if a trainer needs counseling, guess what we can do now? We can begin to counsel him or her and help them to improve that area that they need strengthening up. So we'll have real-time feedback on how the course went.
And it also leaves the evaluation process a little bit anonymous, so that the trainer is not immediately seeing who said that comment about them.
Well, even more important than that, I'm tired, I want to go home, it's been a long week.
Yeah.
You're giving me time to really reflect. And,
Exactly.
Yeah, that's great.
Courses will be monitored by proctors for fidelity, and we've spoken on that one many times, so I won't go back to that. And trainers will be required to recertify to maintain training status. And we haven't quite nailed that part down yet, but what we know is that trainers will be required to keep up their training status, as opposed to just going from year to year to year to year. They're going to have to do some type of recertification process.
Fidelity and no infidelity.
Yes.
Yes, sir. I'll leave it at that. Okay, so that's my part, and now Wes will come up and follow.
Thank you, Ron.
Yes, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry. I have a question.
Everybody for coming today. If you attended yesterday, double thanks. I was thinking, as Ron was speaking, we've been giving updates on this certification process for some time, and I think it was last year or maybe the year before, I think we addressed a room full of 7. So when I look out at the room today, it's very encouraging to see the the amount of folks here and just the interest in this topic. I'm going to talk about a topic that I'm not really well versed in, which is consumer-operated services. Speaking of not being well versed, I'm not sure. Oh, here we go. We're going to start by just talking a little about evidence-based practices. I think we've heard some about that during the conference, but really evidence-based practices are practices that have research has shown to be effective. And I think the standard is that at least 2 research studies have shown this and that those studies have been replicated. I believe that's the standard. But so, we're really talking about effectiveness in helping people to recover, to really achieve their goals in life. Some examples of evidence-based practices, supported employment. Really pleased with the work that Emery has been doing in this area. I think we'll be seeing more progress across the state of North Carolina to implement not just supported employment, but an evidence-based practice model. Assertive community treatment team. For those of you who attended the pre-conference, I know I've learned a great deal from the pre-conference training on ACT, and I want to remind folks, I believe all the handouts, all of the PowerPoints are available on the Northwest AHEC website. I won't just read through the list. I will say that I do feel that what we really want to concentrate on today are the 2 services of peer support and consumer-operated service programs. But you might, people do ask the questions at times, why implement evidence-based practices? And we included this slide. This is certainly one reason why you might consider really concentrating on evidence-based practices that have been proven to be effective. The desire really is to support people in a way that we know we're going to get the most bang for our buck, and that will actually help people to, to achieve their goals in life. So, when we say consumer-operated service program, it's there is a federal definition of such. I'm going to cheat a little. I love my phone because I can pull up websites, and this is actually off of the SAMHSA toolkit on consumer-operated service programs. What they say they're talking about is that the organization is independent, that it is administratively controlled and operated by people who are mental health consumers, autonomous, decisions about governance, fiscal, personnel, policy, and operational issues are made by the program and not some other entity. The programs are accountable. Responsibilities for decisions rest within that program. And then consumer controlled. In other words, the governance board is at least 51% people who are mental health consumers. And then also the final key would be that the programs employ people who are peers. Interestingly, to me anyway, maybe not to you, but at least to me, up until 2006, area programs actually by statute were by law supposed to include at least 50% people on their governing boards who were people who were consumers and their family members. And we've changed that in some ways over the years. I think in 2006 legislation was passed that brought that number down to a minimum of 1 person. But I've been actually encouraged to see that law has now changed again. And we are seeing now more inclusion of people who are CFAC members. And so by definition, people who are consumers and their family members included in governing roles on the governing bodies of LME MCOs. But you can kind of see from that history, we've gone a little up and down in that as far as letting folks who are consumers, have a governing role in our service system. Admittedly, North Carolina, as a state, I don't know that we've wrapped our minds around how to fund in a sustainable way consumer-operated service programs. We do have some in North Carolina. There is a smattering. But I don't know that we have actually figured out a sustainable way to support these programs. I think there's much work to be done, and I think that work is going to be done by folks who really have a passion for it. Consumer-operated service programs are unique. They're not just simply mental health services, which are delivered by consumers. They really have a different worldview, more of a wellness type worldview than an illness worldview. And really the approach to helping rather than traditional service programs. See a hand.
Yes, I was in the breakout session yesterday on the healing place.
Yes.
Is that an example of a consumer-operated service?
You know, very much so. It actually is the first that I know of that has lasted anyway. Yes, they are a consumer-operated service program, to my knowledge. I believe I've seen Dennis Farnell speak on that subject matter, and I actually had an opportunity to tour that facility. You know, I urge anybody that has time and energy to go to Raleigh and tour the Healing Place facility. I think it's a wonderful example of what can be done. I often wonder why we don't have one of places like that in every large city in North Carolina. But that's my own wonderings. Shireen and then Ken?
When a behavioral health agency has a peer program, so right now with the B3 services, so they're hiring peers to provide peer support, is that considered a consumer-operated program?
Well, a little different, and that
service?
does go back to that definition, you know, that I was talking about, where, you know, really to be considered a consumer-operated service program, your area board, your governing board would need to be at least 51%, and you would need to have management and staff who are people with lived experience as well. So I'm not sure I answered your question, but I would have to guess no.
That's the right answer. So when
Okay. So this was. You're still mad at me about the Charlotte comment.
Yes, I am.
Did you have a follow-up?
So I wanted to emphasize that what we see happening is organizations, behavioral health organizations that are now hiring peer support specialists are calling themselves peer-run programs or peer-operated programs, and that's not what we're talking about with consumer-operated services. With a consumer-operated service, the organization is operated for and by people in recovery.
Right. Well, Shireen, thank you. I really want to stress this website that we provided a link to. You can use this website to go home and challenge folks as far as what, if they're calling something that it's not correct, please do your research. Ken?
There are actually 2 healing places. Originally, there was one for men only. I was on the Wake County Human Services Board at the time, representing people with mental illness. And then they opened a second one for women and children. So I asked the board, what about men and children? And they fixed the problem. They took and children off the women. But they still allow them there, but not for men.
Thank you, Ken. Yeah, again, anybody that has a desire, I do believe the Healing Place is open to having folks come and check that place out, kick the tires. Carol?
You were saying you didn't know why it was that North Carolina hasn't seen fit to find a sustainable way to fund these services.
Well, I'm not sure that's exactly how I put it. I just think I was, you know, I am saying, though, I don't believe we have figured out a way. Not seen fit,
well,
but I'm not sure we have figured that out.
And that
Certainly.
was that Nancy Moore came up to me, because I was talking about a pre-run respite center. And she looked at me and she goes, well, a lot of families...
Back at the case management conference, we actually had social workers who were questioning whether their code of ethics would allow them to work with folks in a peer role. I think there's a lot that we all have to learn about this, and I do think that, as I said before, you know, with anything new, there's going to be some apprehension, but it's important to kind of trudge on. I've heard it said even, you know, really in the early days of Peer Bridger at Dix, I remember a person saying, why should we give money to people who are crazy to help people who are crazy? Pretty damn offensive, you know, but But at least they said it, because then I knew where that person was coming from. So I think we have to continue to dialogue with people and try to win them over, or not. Shereen?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment about that. I think we're seeing the evolution of our system, and it's not new. It's just now that it's surrounding peer support. And working with many hospital systems, this is what happened when they introduced social workers to the hospital system. So before it was nurses and docs, and when they started introducing social workers, there was a huge fear and there was a huge uproar around these non-medical people coming onto a unit in a hospital, being able to serve people. And are they going to take our jobs? And are they going to be competent and skilled? And so I just want to say that this is an old issue that we see happening over and over and over again. It just happens to be that we've gotten to the place in our system where peers are being recognized as valued, having a valued role within our behavioral health system. The other people within the system have a learning curve around that. So we have a little ways to go, but it's not an unusual situation.
Very, very nicely said, Shereen. Folks, we have a number of other speakers, and I appreciate people raising their hands, but I think I'm going to continue to move through the program so that we can get to the other folks. I'm not going to just read these. I actually have decided just now that I don't really like the title of these slides. Why should you be interested in consumer-operated services? I don't want to tell you that you should.
That's from the SAMHSA toolkit, so we should ask them to change it.
But I can tell you that I'm personally very interested in these services, and I kind of catch that quite a few other folks are as well. But you know, some of the mental health system benefits: enriched service choice and array, expanded availability of services, expanded access, reaching people who are underserved, and then value. So when we're talking value, you know, people value different things, but certainly from a resources perspective, there's value, and also from people who self-report the benefits that they have received. I think I skipped a slide or two.
You may have, we're having issues. I apologize with the
Well, anyway, so we say the service system itself benefits. We also have community benefits, community education, and destigmatization. Gosh, am I doing that?
That's me.
Apologize. Collaborative networks, public health promotion, energizing the community, and then, you know, the research indicates there are also individual benefits. And when I say research, there have been a number of studies. Probably most importantly, the Gene Campbell did a very long-term study on consumer-operated service programs. And those studies have shown that consumer-run services, consumer providers can broaden access to peer support, engage people more effectively, and actually have been now designated as promising practices, I believe. I'm a little lost now.
I'm sorry.
Well, just remember, we got your slides.
Yeah.
We can just follow your handouts.
Sorry about that, guys.
No. So the name of Gene Campbell's study really was the COSP, Multi-Site Study Initiative. You know, I had an opportunity to see her actually present on that, and it was really, it was a long-term study and very well done, very well constructed. And really, you know, the bottom line for me is that I'm fairly confident that study showed that as an adjunct to traditional mental health services, peer support is truly an effective way to assist folks to regain, to actually foster recovery. So, folks, I think that takes me to the end of my slides. If people did have questions, if we get to the end of the, I want to make sure we get Emery and Debbie up here before we run out of time, but we'll be here after the presentation as well.
I'd just like to
With
make a comment that
evidence on consumer operated?
Yeah, so the toolkit has a lot of links, and just Google it yourself, and you'll find a bunch of recent journal articles. Because the toolkit was developed in 2011, but since then there's been a lot of data that's come in from longitudinal studies, and Shereen can quote them all day about the effectiveness of peer support. So consumer-operated services, peer support is one aspect of it. Another one is peer-run businesses, peer-run organizations, peer-run anything. So the toolkit gives you some idea of where to start, and a lot of websites that have come up of national peer initiatives and that kind of thing. So, all right, so I'm taking over the slide where it says U.S. DOJ in North Carolina. For those of you who weren't here in our pre-conference on Wednesday, we talked a lot about this, so I'm not going to get too weedy into what this is all about, but those of you who've heard the word DOJ, what is that, you know? So basically, this is our Transitions to Community Living Initiative, and I wanted to highlight that as an example of sometimes what it takes for things to change and for really new initiatives to take place in a state. And this is not unique to North Carolina by any means. On the next slide, you'll see that what that really focuses on is the integration of people in the community. People with severe and persistent mental illness happens to be the one in our state. Many other states, like you'll see my list here, and this is not all inclusive. Oregon, for example, has a DOJ lawsuit around people with developmental disabilities and employment. So it really is about all ages, all disability groups, anybody that is being segregated without being offered choices. So what we see is that focus on community integration, and what better to help with that than peer support. So the next slide, you'll see adult mental health service requirements. And I'm going fast on purpose, sorry. We have to make sure that the services we provide are evidence-based, recovery-focused, and community-based. Peer support hits all three of them, right? Make sense? So some of the services that we are working on that are referenced in the DOJ settlement are these that are bulleted there. So you have ACT, and I'll talk about all the services and what they have to do with peer support. But peer support services is mentioned in our DOJ settlement agreement. It's a little blurb there. You got to dig for it, but it's there. So the attorneys, the folks that developed this, said peer support works. It's important. Let's put it in there. So we really take that as the initiative to go ahead and really revamp and bring up to scale the peer support services that we've been offering in our state. So that's just reinforcement of what we're doing and why. So the next chart you'll see, I have listed like ACT services, supported employment, CST. Each of these services have peer support within the service, okay? So we have ACT teams that have peer support specialists in every ACT team. Are there any here that work on an ACT team? All right, represent. So the ACT team peer specialists, they help the team with developing wellness self-management strategies. They help educate the entire team about the values of peer support and wellness. The peer specialist works with the individuals on the team to help the person look forward to their recovery and look at possibilities in their life. Our new supported employment services, like Judith Cook was saying today, she's very excited, I'm excited, she's excited, that we actually have embedded peer support within supported employment. We're the first state that has done that. So that's going to be very interesting to see how peer support can really help a person in their financial wellness, in their going back to work and getting support and moving on with their life. And CST teams also have options to hire peer specialists in the team. On the back, you'll see that it says InReach staff and tenancy supports. So for those of you guys who were in the presentation yesterday from Cardinal, they talked about InReach. We have one of those here, Margaret, InReach specialist. Any other InReach folks? So InReach are the folks that are going into the adult care homes and hospitals and talking to people who live there and offering options and saying, you know what, you also can move into the community, and you also can work, and you also can do whatever. So the InReach specialists are peers themselves. They have the lived experience. They're certified, and every single MCO in our state has to hire at least one certified peer support specialist to do this role. Very important. A lot of you guys are familiar with peer bridgers. Same thing. Same thing, same concept. Tenancy supports for housing. These are folks that are we're developing positions for people who are peer support specialists that can also help somebody who's living in their own community apartment and helping them with learning skills to live independently. So those are examples that peer support is not just in one little pocket. It's in many, many different services and supports throughout our state. So the peer support definition, I get a question about this every day, every week at least. An email, where's the peer support definition? What's going on? All right, so I'll try to give you what I know till now, and we're still working on getting that developed. But every MCO, managed care, if you guys have heard the word 1915B3 waivers, the word waiver itself, managed care, whatever, they all have the option to develop services under what's called a B3. So peer support is a B3 service. Every MCO has access to that. Not every MCO is in the process of implementing it yet in their area, but they have access to it. So some of them have already done it. I know Cardinal has, Western Highlands, well now they're smoking, ECBH. Sandhills just did? All right, one more to the list. So you can see that now as they've all become managed care organizations, they've all started looking at what they can do and said, yeah, we really want to prioritize this, or maybe that's something we want to do next year. It's up to them. We're really trying to reinforce the fact that this is an evidence-based practice. They should be developing this in their community. So knowing that, we had some work groups. Let me get to that one. So,
certification is necessary to be paid with medical funds.
And that's a good point. I'll talk about that in reference to the comment about consumer-operated services and this definition. So a work group got together. We met over several weeks to develop a new evidence-based definition around peer support. So what we're trying to do is have the MCOs adopt it so that they could use the same definition statewide. But what this definition does is that it references literature and the evidence-based models that we talked about. It also promotes recovery-focused services, wellness planning. So we purposely use the term wellness plan instead of person-centered plan or any other kind of term. So it's around wellness. It's around the well-being of the person and the holistic life that they should be looking forward to. Integration of substance abuse and mental health, right? We heard a lot about integration in the last couple of days. And the emphasis around consumer-run programs. So what's to stop a group of 2 or 3 peers to get together and say, I want to start my own business. We have supported employment programs that could help start a business. That business could be a peer-run program. If you are able to get your contracts with your MCO done, you can get a 501c3, you could get all the things that would take to start a little nonprofit. You could get a contract and bill Medicaid. You might have to partner with an agency because of licensures and those kinds of things, but that's how things start. Right, Shireen?
Yes.
So it gives the opportunity to really promote that. So it's not that the definition says you must start consumer-run programs, but if people are creative and willing and able to, it provides an avenue to do that. The definition also requires people who provide this service to be certified, not paraprofessionals. Why do you think that is?
Well, credibility.
Well,
Duh.
The unique.
to build Medicaid,
They're not necessarily peers.
Okay, so historically, that's been allowed. But what we really want to see is a workforce that is certified, trained, gone through a good process to have the skills to do this right? Okay, so the other thing is the definition really promotes specialty roles. Okay, so you can have a peer who only works with the veterans in this county who have substance abuse issues. That's a lot of specialty. But it allows you to do that, you know. So what about youth? You know, peers, 15 minutes, oh boy. What about youth and jail diversion? And so you see all the vast amount of specialty areas. So we know that that's something that we really want to promote. We also have to develop training and supports around that. That's why all these things are working at the same time, right? All right, so what we wanted to do is have Debbie Webster talk about a specialty role for older adults within peer support.
Good morning. So good to see you all. I'm going to talk quickly, but I do need to say some of you have been around in the early 2000s, 2000, 2001, and saw where we were in the struggle. Older people, and this is for the whole span of older adults, they take medicine, they take a lot of medicines, and it causes them to misuse them. They will take more than what was prescribed. They may share prescriptions with their friends. That we see a whole lot. Or they take more of the medication than what's prescribed because it makes them feel good. If you've ever been on Percocet, Oxycodone, any of those, you know, hey, you feel good. Well,
They also sell them.
Say what now?
They also sell to supplement.
Oh,
Yeah.
we don't even talk about that because that's illegal.
They take less because they can't afford it.
Well, that's two, and what do? Instead of buying their prescription, they drink. Or they use drugs because it's the same effect.
Well, maybe, but a lot of people cannot afford their meds, even if they're being anything.
You know, my brother told me something, who had a lot of health issues, and really extreme pain. And he was an alcoholic. And what he said to me, why do I want to take prescriptions like Percocet? It's going to make me tired, it's going to make me sick to the stomach, I won't want to go anywhere. When I can go out, hang out, have fun, and drink. And that alcohol does the same thing, but I'm not isolated. How could I argue with that? I really couldn't argue with him. Well, he passed away a year or some ago, but it had nothing to do with his drinking. And his doctor said his liver was really not that bad, and my brother could put it away. He died of a stroke.
Come from alcoholism also.
Yeah, so what we're looking at, and I know I've got to hurry, what we're looking at is the role of peers for older adults and having the specialty of people that are in that older adult group, you know, our folks at 55 and older that are in recovery, that are peer support specialists, can reach out to people, and when you talked about having people within the same kind of grouping, that they can reach out to them and say, wait a minute, you don't have to suffer. You don't have to, because what's going to happen is that suicide number is going to increase. And that's sad. So where do we want to use them? Senior centers. My yell is, finally! Finally! Finally, we're where we need to be. We need to go further in where we are, but I have to say what Shireen said. Look at where we are. I just, my heart swells with it. So what I want to talk about is, how do you do
Next
this?
one. The right one. Right there. Yeah.
That one. Okay. How many here in this room are from the baby boomer generation? Let's be proud. Look at how many of us. We're coming to the age of retirement. We're coming to the age where maybe our health isn't quite so good. Maybe we start to lose independence. We may be starting to lose family members. This is serious numbers up here. And what you're looking at is that by 2030, there will be a 51.5% population growth. That is the projection in North Carolina. And what we're seeing right now with where we are with the number of older adults, and we talk about that over the age of 55 to 60. Oh my gosh, I may be one of those very soon. But we're seeing significant mental health and substance use needs. And, let's see, I'm going to skip through some of this. What we're going to see is that suicide is becoming a serious issue. So I want to talk about depression real quick. 20%, 65 plus, have a diagnosis of depression. But who are they getting their service from? primary care. Primary care is the one person that people who are over the age of 65, 60, where do we go? We end up going to our doctor. And our primary care doctor does not see or diagnose depression. Because depression can look like a lot of medical things. What are some of the causes of depression as we get older? Loneliness. You're in your own apartment, you're not working anymore, you may have lost your social group. Chronic illness. Chronic illness will just zap your life out of you. Just zap your desire to be around people. Loss of independence, and if you have to be moved out of your home and move into some other environment. And many of us with our parents have seen that having happen. Suicide. Depression is a significant predictor of suicide. This is what is scary. Older folks over the age of 65 comprise of only 13% of the U.S. population, but account for 20% of all the suicide deaths. And the biggest is amongst males over the age of 85, which has nearly 6 times the suicide rate of the other populations in the United States. And that means that it compares to those folks, the younger group. And the other thing, I'm sorry, what? Yes. This is what's another scary thing. Do you know that most of the people that have actually, older adults who have actually died from a suicide have seen their primary doctor? 20% within 24 hours, 41% within a week, and 75% by a physician a month. I've seen them in a month. That is scary. That is really scary.
Do you know, Debbie, is that because there's a correlation between something medical going on and the suicide? Is somebody just seen their doctor, maybe diagnosed with something medical, or
there's all kinds. I wish I could.
Okay.
You don't know. I can talk for an hour and a half presentation about this, so I'm doing real quick.
Yeah.
But there's going to be lots of training coming up because the state is finally looking and becoming aware. Hey, we better start thinking about this. Yes, ma'am.
And can you mention that there's going to be the Mental Health, Substance Use, and Aging Coalition's having a conference in June? I think it's June 20th.
Yes, I was going to provide on that, yeah.
And it's something to really be kind of paying attention to, but there's education on both sides that kind of needs to happen. That's a step towards that direction. So.
I think the answer to part of your question is multi-causal.
Yes.
We should figure it out.
Yes, and any of you who are interested in attending this symposium, which is the first in North Carolina, Mental Health, Substance Use, and Aging, please email me. I'll make sure you get that. This is so funny to me, by Joseph Kofer. And he had stated, the baby boomer cohort, people born between years 1946, 64, is the first U.S. history it's the first generation in U.S. history with a majority having used illicit drugs sometimes in their lives. Yeah. We're not going to talk about that, are we? We're not going to identify. But you know, this is just some national data. But what we see is that people who use drugs, illegal drugs, and were heavy drinkers, they recovered. A large number recovered. A large number, don't do that anymore. What the statistics are showing is as the baby boomer population is growing, they've gone back. They've started to use drugs again. They're drinking more and more. And the issue of where they weren't doing that is because they were living the life. They had a job, they were married, they had kids, they were just involved. All of a sudden, you're not.